This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to what? What is it? Yeah, it's Creep Street Podcast.
Oh, yes. Welcome aboard. Welcome all.
Yes, we're so happy to have you here today, tonight, midnight, the really early morning, the afternoon, whatever time it could be when you're listening, you know? So, of course, please, if you're a fan of the show, throw us a like, a subscribe, a follow, any of those sorts of things. We so appreciate it. And, feel free to check us out on any of our social media accounts. We got them all.
Yeah.
It's Creep Street Podcast,
Yeah.
And also, if you are needing a little bit more Creep Street.
That's right. Who doesn't, folks?
Yes.
I need more of it.
I know. You can head over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And there we will have all sorts of just fantastic, lovely bonus material. On there, we have all sorts of great things. We've got bonus episodes. We have interviews, discussions, movie reviews, all sorts of good stuff there.
We had to do that twice because Maureen didn't like the noises I was making.
It was rated X.
It was.
It was inappropriate. It was actually inappropriate. But I understand why you did that, because signing up for Patreon, or our Patreon specifically, is as pleasurable as your load.
Absolutely.
I can't say plug. It is as pleasurable as a sexual encounter.
Yes, Maureen, yes, it is.
Be in your L.
Yes. And let me tell you something. We will all reach the climax of terror today.
God. Yeah. Oh, two more quick things before we get to that orgasmic scare. First of all, the merch situation is almost ready to launch.
Guys, this is so freaking cool, and the designs Mo has come up with are super fun.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking we're going to have a bunch of different designs that will just slowly, as time goes on, maybe one design will be taken out and then another design will be put in. Maybe some designs will just be limited edition. It's going to be all sorts of good stuff. So I would say keep an eye out for that within the next 2 weeks at the most. So get ready for that, everybody. And also, speaking of exciting announcements happening in the next couple weeks.
Yes.
Here on Creep Street, we have been releasing episodes on Fridays since the beginning of time.
Since the Big Bang.
Yeah. But we have decided to maybe switch things up a little bit. Get a little weird.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you need to switch it up. Variety is the spice of life. And for that reason, Creep Street, soon, not right now or not next week, but shortly, will be released on Mondays, everybody. Monday.
That's right. And there's a reason for this. There's a few different reasons for this.
Yeah.
One, apparently traffic is, even though we've done very well with Fridays, they say traffic for podcasts is best earlier in the week.
We want to get you guys able to maybe get some fresh content at the top of the week, because we know a lot of you like to listen when you're driving, when you're at work, all these sorts of things. And then on the weekend, sometimes you gotta let your tits out and you gotta have fun and you gotta dance. And sometimes you can't be reminded of the horrors of the world. And we understand that.
Right. And this will be something, it'll be a few weeks yet till it starts. Yeah. But also the other reason was just a practical reason for us. This will allow us to, it'll make the editing process a little better for us for our schedules and whatnot.
Yeah.
So looking forward to it in that regard as well. But that'll be in a few weeks. We'll give you more heads up right before it happens and everything.
Yes, and of course. Well, now that we've talked about all this exciting, fun stuff, Dylan, what do we have in store for us today? What are we talking about today? What are the spooks and scares?
We're revisiting some old friends.
Oh, who?
It's been a little while, folks, but we are returning to the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Whoa.
This week's episode is The Haunting of the Smurl Family, Volume 1. Yes, folks. Buckle up. I have one source here. My main source was a book called The Haunted by Robert Curran. He's written many of the books about Ed and Lorraine's travels and their stories.
Indeed. I am excited to get back into Ed and Lorraine. It really has been a long time.
It sure has. And this is one that has not been made yet into a motion picture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it will eventually, but we're getting the scoop now.
Hell yeah.
And by the way, folks, and I'm not just being hyperbolic, I truly think this will be one of the scariest episodes we've done. I'm finishing up part 2 now. Oh my gosh, I think it's going to be a banger.
I am very intrigued.
So buckle up, folks, because here we go. Now, the book opens with this, and I thought it was an interesting thing, but it says that those who believe in the occult generally think there are 2 ways in which a house can become demonically infested.
Oh, boy.
One is through some sort of awful, violent act that invites a spirit into a house and even allows it to remain there dormant, sort of lying in wait.
Mm-hmm.
This, of course, would be something like a murder or something awful in that realm of things, you know? And in the second way it's believed that a house can become infested is by willingly inviting a presence in. In Ed and Lorraine Warren's point of view, even just joking around with something like a Ouija board can allow something through, something you don't want to mess with.
Yikes.
An example they give is, of course, the Amityville case. And maybe such is the case with the story we are talking about today. Now, the house we're discussing resides on Chase Street in the town of West Pittston, Pennsylvania, a community of about 10,000 people, so not a big place, just a nice town. It's a duplex that we'll be talking about today that was built all the way back in 1896, and before the Smurl family came there, the family that our story revolves around, it has seen many families come and go, but even outside of the Smurl family haunting, the town of West Pittston has had a history of dark events. Most of the town sits over anthracite mines, which actually gave the town a bit of prosperity for many decades. Today, though, the mines are filled with water, and it has actually caused many cave-ins for many homes.
Oh, God.
In fact, in the late 1930s and 40s, the risk of mines caving in actually caused schools to be closed.
Yikes.
This part now, I had trouble wrapping my head around. Some even think that these cave-ins allowed demonic spirits to come up to the Earth's surface. Now, they kind of flirted with that. You remember in like the first Nun movie?
Yeah.
How like it was like the German bombs that like opened up the Earth and allowed these demons. Now,
yeah.
You know, we think of heaven above, hell below.
Yeah.
I've never understood it though as to be like actual like
no, it's
like they're under the Earth's surface. Like it's more of like a metaphysical thing.
Right. It's also, and I could be wrong, maybe they mention that in the Bible itself, I don't know, but a lot of our imagery and thoughts about what hell is just from Dante. It's just from a writer. It's not like from thousands of years after the fact. our imagery of hell is from a story. It's not from the Bible. So it's like that. I always think about that too, where I'm like, oh yeah, it's like, oh, the ground opened up and let the demons out. It's like, so they're just like in the core of the earth. Is that like,
right.
I don't know. I don't really get that either, but who knows?
Right. Now, what is interesting is that long before the Smurl family moved in, the locals had long whispered rumors about the place, that it was the site of unexplainable things. It's said that even police had been called out there before. Many reported hearing strange noises coming from inside the house, even when it was unoccupied. Parents did not let their children play in front of the house because there were times when people claimed to have seen ghostly things through the windows, people walking about, floating about on the inside. And of course, the locals always believed that there was, secret bands of people practicing witchcraft in the town. And given that this haunting that we're discussing takes place between the years of 1974 and 1989, it's no surprise they felt that way because this was the peak, the heart of the satanic panic. One person who was interviewed for the book was quoted saying,
"It was the perfect place for Halloween night. Think of yourself as a little kid. There's a full moon and jack-o'-lanterns in all the windows. And then there's this one house with this really strange kind of grip on the whole neighborhood. At dinner sometimes you hear your parents talking about it, but they didn't know any more than you did, really. Just that it was alleged that satanic things went on there sometimes. So on Halloween night, well, I've never been sure if there was something wrong with the place or not. All I knew was that when I got close to it, I had this eerie sensation that this wasn't like any other house."
So, let's meet the family, the Smurl family.
Let's meet them.
First, there's Jack. Jack Smurl is the patriarch of our story, and he was born and raised in the area. And just for reference, West Pittston and Pittston as a whole are not that far from the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area.
Yes.
And of course, no, Michael Scott will not be making an appearance in this episode.
I thought about The Office earlier when you mentioned the Anthracite Museum.
Absolutely. Well, that's right where this haunting takes place, in that area. Here's a little background on old Jack Smurl, according to my source. It said he was very easygoing, very smart. The year he graduated high school, the biggest songs in the country were Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Mac the Knife, and Elvis's A Big Hunk of Love.
Oh, yeah.
His father worked as a welder, and it didn't give a profession for his mother. I'm assuming just being the time it was, she was maybe a stay-at-home mom, that sort of thing, just given the era. Jack also made good friends that his parents approved of and was never one to get in trouble. Now, as we know, Jack, like we said, very smart. He could have easily gotten into a good college after graduating from the local Catholic high school there. But the idea of more studying did not interest Jack. Instead, he decided to join the Navy, and while there, he continued to be a hard worker and excelled very well. There, he also made more good friends, and while in the service, he took on a job as a neuropsychiatric technician. And what that means is he assisted the doctors in administering electroshock therapy.
Whoa.
While this practice today is obviously very highly controversial, even barbaric, Jack took a liking to his work. He took note of how mental illness could affect one's perception of reality.
Let's give him the benefit of the doubt here, okay? This was just normal and thought to be very helpful to people at the time, their version of electroshock. So just because he did this doesn't necessarily mean he's, a monster, a mad doctor or something like that.
Exactly.
And technically, electroshock still does happen, but it's just very different and, much more rare. But anyway, continue.
It would be something that would come into play later in his life. But most importantly, the Navy taught Jack that people come in all walks of life with their own beliefs and customs, and it taught him to respect those different than himself. And while away in the service, he learned that there was no place in the world he'd rather be than back home there in northeastern Pennsylvania, where he was born and raised.
No place? No place else.
Well, certainly not the place he's going to end up at, that's for fucking sure.
Oh, God. It's like, don't get me wrong. I've spent time in Pennsylvania. It's great. I love it. But is it the one place in the world I want to be? I don't know.
Right.
But you know what? That is neither here nor there. Continue.
Now let's meet Janet, the matriarch of our story.
Okay.
She is Jack's wife, and while Jack was away in the Navy, Janet was wrapping up high school in the town of Duria, Pennsylvania, which was not far from Jack's hometown in West Pittston, which was not far from Jack's hometown. My source describes Janet as being very pretty, and in high school she wore big oval rim glasses. She had lots of friends and was well-liked herself, and just like Jack, she was never really drawn to rebellion like many of her peers were. Drugs and premarital sex were just not for her.
No.
Janet was raised by her mother after her parents had gone through a tumultuous divorce. She, on top of schoolwork and various other aspects of teenage life, Janet also had to help her mother a lot. Her mother worked at a local retirement home as a senior citizens affairs director. Really, she was the picture of the usual teenager at the time. She loved music and walking in nature and gossiping with her friends, just all the usual stuff. As high school was coming to an end, Janet had a number of ideas for careers to pursue. But if there was one thing Janet loved, it was caring for children. And given her Catholic upbringing, she considered it a privilege as well. The year Janet graduated from Northeast High School, the top songs in the country were Downtown, You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', and This Diamond Ring, and of course the anti-Vietnam War song Eve of Destruction.
Oh.
So it paints you a little picture when they met, that was going on, all that stuff.
I like that. It's a good way to kind of get you in the what the feel of the time was like.
Exactly.
The Unspooled podcast, I highly recommend you check that out. It's not really horror specific. They discuss movies, but there they do the same thing with giving you the song titles that were big at the time, and it's a good way to get in the spirit.
Yes, in the book, my source did that, and I was like, oh, that's a great way to kind of paint a picture for the audience.
Yeah. Also check out Unspooled.
So right out of high school, Janet went to work at the local confectionery company in the packaging department. And here's what's funny, Jack would actually work there too after the Navy, but the two wouldn't actually meet each other until the company Christmas party in 1967.
Oh, wow.
So they actually worked together for a little while and didn't even know it.
Hey.
The two fell fast and hard. They both knew they had met the one they wanted to be with for the rest of their lives. They were married almost exactly a year later on December 28th, 1968.
Well, there you go.
Now, the first few years of their marriage were by all accounts awesome. Jack and Janet had their first two girls, Dawn and Kim, and Janet decided to leave her job to be a stay-at-home mom. And at the time, Jack was getting promoted again and again at work, making good money. And at the time, they were living actually with Jack's parents at their home in Wilkes-Barre. But in 1972, Hurricane Agnes came rolling in and flooded the house with over 12 feet of water.
Oh, fuck. That sucks.
Now, the family worked hard to save the place and were actually able to renovate it, but the Wilkes-Barre Redevelopment Authority took over the home, forcing them to move.
Yeah, that was probably for the best, I think.
Well, it was then that the house in question came into the lives of the Smurl family in the autumn of 1973. John and Mary Smurl, so Jack's parents, they bought a duplex in West Pittston, located at 328 and 330 Chase Street for the price of $18,000.
I could throw up, but continue.
Now, at the time of purchasing the duplex, the Smurls were unaware of any stories surrounding the place. All they knew was that an old man had owned the 330 side of the duplex, and that it had been vacant for many years, and that the 328 side had been owned by an old woman who rented it out to tenants. And before buying, they did the responsible thing and had the place looked over. The plumbing, lighting, and foundation, and even for termites, and all was good. That same fall, Jack and Mary sold the 328 side of the duplex to Jack and Janet for the sweet price of only $4,000.
Oh my God.
That'll make you want to rip your eyes out.
I'm upset.
Definitely a family discount if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And on October 1st, 1973, Jack and Janet moved into 328 Chase Street with their daughter. So this is what's interesting about this haunting. Is it's one building,
right?
But it's two separate homes. It's a duplex.
Right.
So the grandparents, John and Mary in 330, Jack and Janet with their kids in 328.
Okay.
So just so we can have a picture in our minds.
Indeed.
There. And at first, things were even better than they were while living in Wilkes-Barre. Janet became very active in the community, even joining the West Pittston chapter of the Lionesses Club. even becoming their first president.
Hell yeah.
Jack was also part of the local Lions Club, working as a secretary for them for a couple of years. Janet was even one of the organizers for the local Students Against Drunk Driving chapter at the Wyoming area high school.
Oh, hell yeah. That's great.
Both Jack and Janet would help out the girls' softball league and participated in helping the local Cherry Blossom Festival as well.
This is so cute.
For the first 18 months at 328 Chase Street, life was bliss. But this is where our story really begins.
Oh, God.
Now, like many of the hauntings we cover, when the creepy stuff started, it started slowly, very mundane.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, it was things you wouldn't even think twice about.
Right.
In January of 1974, Mary Smurl purchased a pretty new red carpet. But when the delivery men brought it over and they rolled it out, they found there was this large, round grease stain in the middle of the rug.
Oh.
So they just used some cleaning solution and they got the stain to come out, no problem.
Oh, great.
But a couple days later, the stain just showed up again overnight.
Oh, yeah, weird.
So they cleaned it up again, and sure enough, a few days later, it was back. Well, after doing that a few more times, the Smurls finally just tossed out the rug and got a new one, and this new one had no issues with it.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking maybe was there something wrong with like the flooring and then that was messing up the rug or something, but it doesn't seem like it. I just was wondering because I do know someone that had a mushroom growing within their apartment and they would clean it off every day and then a couple days later there'd be another mushroom there. So anyway, I was wondering if that was the situation, but it doesn't appear like that.
Then there was Jack and Janet's TV. Jack was an avid Western fan and he had a particular love for John Wayne. In fact, the family had a portrait of John Wayne hanging in their living room.
Oh my God.
After a long, hard day of work, there was nothing that Jack loved to do more than to kick back and watch a Western.
Hey, God bless.
Well, one night in 1974, Jack was enjoying a Western when all of a sudden, without warning, the television just burst into flames.
Oh God, that's weird.
They were lucky it didn't burn the whole building down, but Jack was able to put the fire out before the flames spread. But that was just the beginning of a series of strange fires. After the TV fire, the family's brand new electric stove caught fire. Next, the wiring in Jack's brand new car caught fire as well, literally just a few days after buying it.
Yeah, something's not quite right here.
And notice, all these fires seem to be electricity related.
Yeah, that is true.
Now, throughout 1974, the family was doing a lot of renovation to the place, and you will remember that John Smurl was a very talented welder. That year, John soldered 30 joints of copper tubing for the water pipes, but when Jack turned on the water, every single joint leaked. So John went through and soldered the pipes again. Once again, they all started leaking immediately. This was only one of many repair issues that kept popping up at the place. Simple tasks that should have taken no more than a few minutes would become huge repair jobs. But this is where things began to get stranger. Jack and Janet took a lot of pride in how they had remodeled their bathroom. They installed a new sink and tub, but the very next morning after installing them, they were shocked to find that both the porcelain sink and the tub had been scratched up beyond repair.
Ooh.
With even chips of it having been knocked off.
Oh my God.
It was the first time that something about the place had truly unsettled them. There was something about the scratch marks that seemed bestial, as if it were done by sharp claws or talons.
Crazy.
But it didn't just stop with the bathroom. Jack would have to repair the woodwork and trim near the ceiling several times because when he would do it, the very next morning, it would be destroyed by these claw-like scratches. Next would be the children. Jack and Janet's daughter, Dawn, is said in the source to have been very smart and athletic, not prone to fanciful thinking. And when the family moved into the duplex on Chase Street, she was a big help to her parents in renovating the place and making it a home. But in 1975, it was clear that Dawn was being affected by something.
Oh.
There were times when Dawn would just come running into her parents' bedroom, screaming at the top of her lungs, saying that there were people floating in her room. And of course, when they would get up to investigate, there would be nothing in her room. Well, a couple of years passed, and enough strange stuff was happening that by 1977, the Smurl family were actually well aware that something was different about the place they lived in. But because these were common sense folk who were religiously devout, they initially didn't let these strange occurrences bother them. If anything, they were somewhat amused by them, if not a little irritated. The family had grown used to things such as the toilets mysteriously flushing on their own. Radios would suddenly turn on all by themselves at full volume. Weirder still, sometimes the radio wasn't even plugged in.
That is something that happens, we hear about every now and then, and I don't know why people don't freak out about that more.
I know, that seems like Freaksville Central.
Like, that is very, like, what could possibly be going on?
Yeah.
There's no battery inside of it.
Once when Jack was alone, he listened as footsteps walked about the house. And he could hear opening and closing in 2 of the bedrooms, like dresser drawers and stuff. He could hear like drawers opening and closing.
Yeah.
Over the next 4 years, the family would grow when twins Shannon and Karen were born in 1977.
Great.
But as the family grew, so did the level of strange activity in the home. One time in the early morning hours, Jack and Janet heard the sound of the chairs on the front porch creaking, as if someone was rocking in them back and forth. When they went to investigate, they were shocked to find the chairs empty, yet still rocking back and forth as if someone was sitting in them. One night, Jack was laying in bed when he felt a hand caress his shoulder and back. He just assumed it was Janet, feeling a little frisky.
Oh.
So he rolled over, only to find Janet sound asleep. Sometimes the thermostat would say 70 degrees, yet the place was as cold as a freezer. Sounds like our place.
I was just going to say, yikes, that's our reality.
One night, John and Mary, Jack's parents, who lived next door, swore they heard a loud, abusive, and vulgar argument going on from Jack and Janet's side of the duplex, like the two were at each other's throats. Jack and Janet assured them that no such thing had happened. And it wouldn't be until things really got weird that Mary herself actually believed them. So what that means is they are hearing Jack and Janet have this vicious argument that's not really happening.
Yeah, it does remind me a little bit of what we've been saying for the past while, but especially on our Patreon, but this idea of mimics.
Yes.
Where it's interesting because we think of these things as so much as being like a visual experience, but it can be auditory too. It's just scary that something could be that convincing that your own mother would think that was your voice.
Exactly right. And as the years went on, things just kept getting stranger. It was in 1983 that the Smurl family began to notice the bad smell around the place.
Oh boy.
The family would search every inch of the home but could never find the source of this bad smell. In fact, they spent most of 1983 trying to find the source of this smell and found nothing. Later, Jack would recall first noticing the smell one day during prayer. He was on his knees reciting the rosary when he first noticed it. As time went on, the strange things just kept getting worse. Janet even put a call in to the Department of Mines to see if maybe there was a chance this weird stuff was being caused by subsidence, which means the gradual caving or sinking of an area of land. But, of course, there were no answers to be had. They had the foundation checked for signs of damage, and there was nothing. Now, while there was certainly plenty of weird things going on around the house, it had really only been their daughter Dawn who claimed to have actually seen or heard like a ghost, seen people floating. But that was about to change. It was a cold winter day, and Janet was doing some chores about the house, and, she liked to keep the TV on during the day while she worked. We do the same thing.
Yeah, just have a little noise going.
Yeah. On that day, it was some kind of game show she had on, and Janet was alone down in the basement putting in a load of laundry. Upstairs, she could hear the sound of the game show playing on the TV, and Janet had just put a load in the washer when she heard something. She could have sworn she heard a voice call her name. Janet. She closed the washer door and stood up straight. She could feel a bit of sweat on her brow and a tingle run up her spine. She wanted to believe that it was just the sound of the TV upstairs, but she was pretty sure she had just heard someone call her name. She stood there still and looked about the quiet basement, but all was normal. There was the green plastic laundry basket in the east corner, and in the west corner, cardboard boxes of Christmas ornaments and the children's old clothes. Nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay.
Janet! She heard it again. And this time there was no denying it. It was clear as day, and it made her blood run cold. She was too scared now to even run back upstairs. She knew there was someone in the basement. She stood there as still as a statue, the only sound being the sound of the game show on the TV upstairs. And, of course, the rumble of the washer while it was doing its thing. Other than that, all was still. Janet! This time, the voice came from behind her. She spun around, but there was no one. She stared in the direction the voice came from, which was just an empty area of the basement. And the voice came again. Janet! This time she could discern that the voice sounded soft and feminine and very eerie. She stared at the empty corner of the basement where the sound was coming from. And though there was no one there that Janet could see, she had a terrible, undeniable feeling that someone was there. And here's the thing, the lights in the basement were on.
Oh,
She was looking at a well-lit corner of the room.
Right. So it's not like it was just maybe something's there, I just can't see it. She just like got the feeling
Yes.
that something was standing there.
The corner of the room from whence this voice was coming was fully lit, so it's not like someone could be hiding behind something. It was a fully lit corner of the room where nothing was there.
Huh.
Then the voice came again.
Oh, God.
Janet! Janet was numb with fear, and all she could think to do was respond. What do you want? Janet called out, but there was no answer. In that moment, not only was she terrified, she felt violated, like her home was no longer hers. After years of strange things going on, it was now confirmed to Janet that something truly unexplainable was happening in her family's home. The voice came again. Janet! Janet responded screaming, "What do you want?" And while she got no response, she could have sworn she heard the faint sound of a voice softly laughing. Trying not to panic, Janet walked slowly to the stairs that led back upstairs. As she ascended up the stairs, she did so backwards so she could keep watch if anyone or anything tried to follow her. Slowly, she backed up, step by step, keeping her eyes peeled for anything at all, but there was nothing. But then, Janet! The voice came again, as if it was now standing at the bottom of the stairs looking up at her.
Oh, God.
Janet turned and ran like hell upstairs, slamming shut the door to the basement. She ran to the kitchen and fell to her knees, and she prayed that God cleanse the house of whatever may be there. She spent the rest of the day on her knees and walking from room to room praying. She was more than relieved when her daughters finally got home from school, smiling and laughing. The next night, after Janet's experience in the basement, she told Jack what had happened, and Jack believed her 100%.
Thank God.
They both agreed that they needed to bring in some help.
Okay, a little bit different from our usual, husband/dad of, a haunted house situation. So, hell yeah.
That's something you're going to find about this story. Everyone immediately believes each other.
Oh, well, that's good.
Being religiously devout, the Smurls believed in the spiritual world, but they were very picky about who they were going to bring in to help. They knew that the field was often filled by charlatans trying to make a buck, but one thing was for sure, Jack and Janet were now scared to be in their own home, and that was unacceptable.
Yeah, no, you can't have that.
In the few days that followed, the kids too would notice their parents seeming very somber, very distant. Dawn especially was very sensitive to it and could tell her mother was keeping something from her. She hated seeing her mother that way, and one morning as she was headed out to school, she suggested to her mother that she go to the mall and treat herself to a new blouse.
Oh, yeah.
Janet actually thought that was a pretty good idea, so once the kids were gone and Jack was at work, she went to the mall, had a snack, got herself a Bismarck and a cup of coffee, and she perused the shops, and she ended up not buying anything, but just being out of the house kind of cheered her up a lot.
Yeah, get your mind on something else. You love it.
When Janet got home from the mall, she flipped on the radio to a soft rock channel and got the ironing board out from the kitchen closet, and she set up and began to iron some clothes, listening to the music coming from the radio. But that was when a frigid cold filled the room.
Oh, God.
And it happened in a split second, as if the temperature literally plummeted.
Mm-hmm.
Janet looked up, and that's when she saw it. Standing there before her was a black humanoid shape, very similar to what you might call a shadow person. It also appeared to be wearing a sort of black cape that fluttered behind it. Looking at it, Janet could tell that whatever it was, it did not appear to be made out of solid substance. It appeared to almost be made out of this black swirling smoke. In fact, she could kind of even see through it at times. There was an odor in the air that the source describes as odd, but not offensive. Well, Janet would later guess that the entity stood at a height of about 5'9", and that's when it began to move towards her. She described its movement as almost being like gliding rather than walking or running.
Oh.
Janet was standing rigid with fear as the thing passed by her, and as it did, the chill and the odor grew very intense. And it rushed by her through the kitchen and into the living room. Janet would later say of this experience,
I stayed very calm. In the movies, people always scream and run, but I just stood with the iron still in my hand and watched the thing. To be honest, I wasn't sure at first whether it even existed. I knew there was a possibility that I was hallucinating or something, but then it started moving toward me, and I knew then that there was no doubt about it. The thing, whatever it was real, very real. I didn't even realize it then, but I'm sure I was suffering from clinical shock. All I could do was stand there and sort of blink my eyes at where the creature had been. I can remember how hard my heart was beating and how I couldn't even work up a good scream in my throat. I was just paralyzed is the only word.
Yeah.
And that paralysis will come back many times in this story.
Yeah, and that's a bit major fear of mine.
Janet slowly walked to the living room where the thing had gone and found it empty. The house was silent. Janet stood there in silence, holding back tears for about 20 minutes. When she decided she was going to go next door and tell her mother-in-law, Mary, what she had just experienced. She was well aware that she may come off as crazy, but she did not care.
No.
So she went over there, and when she got there, she did start to second-guess herself. She sat down next to Mary, trying to keep calm, and she sat down next to her mother-in-law and lit a cigarette. And she had just about decided she was not going to tell her mother-in-law when Mary finally said something.
Oh.
She said, Janet, I have to tell you something, and honestly, I have no idea how. Janet kind of gave a nervous chuckle because, she had just come over to do the same thing.
Right.
Mary was sitting in this old wooden rocking chair that she loved, and she could tell something was up because Mary was not rocking in her chair, and her hands on the armrests had like a vice-like grip.
Yeah. If you're in a rocking chair and you're not rocking, something is wrong.
Mary told her that she had just witnessed some sort of black shadow-like thing. And before she continued, Mary crossed herself and held up a novena prayer card that she had used to pray with every afternoon. Mary hadn't even yet told Janet her experience, but Janet was already feeling a wave of relief just knowing she was not the only one who had seen this thing.
Yeah.
Mary then explained how she was in her chair with her feet up, saying her afternoon prayers as she usually did, when suddenly this black, smoky entity walked down the stairs and through the living room and passed right by her and disappeared. Now, this happened in January. So what is so interesting is that from then until spring, pretty much nothing of note happened.
Okay.
That's what's funny is this haunting takes place, I think I said 73, 74, from the 70s all the way up to 89.
Oh, wow.
So you have to kind of consider a lot of this stuff came in waves and a lot of times was mild.
Yeah.
This was a slow burn of a haunting, truly.
And most hauntings are more like that than what we kind of think of in movies where it's like this unrelenting, just like chaos. That's not really the case ever, really.
Right. Like in our Patreon episode, the Demon House of Detroit was one of those where it kind of started fast. Immediately.
Right. Totally.
Sometimes that does happen, but it is more common that it's a slow build. And what's interesting is even with the renovations, it was slow to build, because usually they say renovations is what
kind of
kickstarts this stuff. So yeah, that happened in January when they saw the smoke person, and then up until spring it was relatively quiet. There was the occasional, flickering lights or the sound of doors or drawers slamming in empty rooms, certainly strange, but nothing that couldn't have been explained by a simple gust of wind or something like that.
Right.
Certainly nothing like seeing a shadow person waltz across your living room.
Right.
You see, in the time building up to Janet and Mary seeing the smoke entity and shortly afterward, the stress had been taking a toll on the family. Jack, who was a very gentle, loving man, had become prone to losing his temper, apparently. And Janet was always a constant ball of nerves. But in the quiet months that followed that strange encounter, everything seemed to chill out and go back to normal. Like even their moods. Jack went back to being more relaxed, and not that he was like cruel to the family, not like that.
But just
was more grumpy,
right.
Things like that, had more of a temper. There was even sometimes when they wondered if maybe whatever it was had moved on.
Hey, I mean, stranger things have happened.
But that would change in the spring. Their daughter, Kim Smurl, was now 13 years old and was about to be confirmed in the Catholic Church. Janet and the girls, on the morning of the ceremony, were in the kitchen, and they were adding an addition onto Kim's pretty white confirmation dress. Kim had the dress on, and Janet was in the process of pinning a collar onto it, when suddenly she heard what sounded like a loud tearing noise. They all heard it, but not like clothes tearing. It wasn't her dress.
Right.
But like the wall itself was being torn in half.
God.
Janet looked up just in time to see the heavy 4-foot-long ceiling light come falling down.
Oh my God.
Janet and the girls screamed and tried to get out of the way. Janet and Kim managed to jump under the kitchen table, but the light fell hard onto Shannon's shoulder.
Oh, God.
Jack, who had been upstairs getting ready himself, ran down the stairs in a flash to find his daughters crying with fear and Janet trying to, observe Shannon's injury. Jack was shocked. He had installed that light himself 7 years ago when the family moved in. He knew the job was done right as well. This was not a matter of the bolts or whatever not being fastened hard enough or something, In fact, it clearly had nothing to do with how it was installed, because it literally brought down chunks of the ceiling and plaster and wiring. Like literally something had to have ripped it down.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other level.
There's like now exposed wires and chunks of like plaster everywhere. Yeah, it would have taken like the weight of a full-grown person, like hanging on it, yanking it, trying to get it down.
Right, yeah. It wouldn't just fall and do all of that, I wouldn't think.
Jack and Janet did what they could to console the girls and hurry them into the car as they were already running late for the ceremony. Janet looked up at the hole that was now in the kitchen ceiling and prayed out loud that no matter what, God protect their children from whatever was in their house. And at the time, she felt within her, for the first time, a true feeling of hatred. Hatred for whatever was in this house and was harming her children.
Welcome to the hate club, my girl. It feels pretty good. I know that's the opposite of what she is saying, but anyway, continue.
In late April, Jack and Janet would take the family on a camping trip. While away, one of their neighbors would report a frightening experience when they just walked by the Smurls' empty house. The man was walking by the place with his wife when suddenly they heard a fluttering noise, but a heavy fluttering noise. It was coming from the second floor of the duplex. He described the noise as if a giant bird was flapping its wings about to take flight.
What?
And that is when the scream started. One that would build and build, a scream so blood-curdling that the man's wife actually left his side and ran like hell all the way back home. The man there stood in terror and just looked up at this duplex, hearing this blood-curdling scream. He would later say that he had never heard someone scream like that before. It was as if someone was dying. But if he had to guess, that was exactly the kind of scream he heard. It was a truly nerve-wracking experience.
Oof. The fluttering. What is that about?
Like birds, yeah.
Yeah.
That's come up a couple of times in haunting stories. I think the Hexen Heads, there was that bird-like entity. But the flapping, it'll come back a few times.
Very strange.
The very next month in May, it was a warm evening and Janet decided to take the girls to go get some new clothes for school. Jack was tired from a long day's work, so he decided he would stay back and relax, and maybe even turn in early. So when Janet and the girls had left, Jack took a book with him to the bedroom. It was a biography of John Wayne, of course.
Of course.
And it was around 7:14 p.m., and Jack dozed off while reading.
We've all done it.
That was when Jack had this weird feeling like he was suspended in air.
Oh.
He opened his eyes, thinking he must have been having a dream, but terror swept over him when he realized this was no dream.
Oh.
Jack was levitating in the air about 2 feet off of the bed.
Oh my God, 2 feet. That's a lot.
Panic overtook him and Jack began to thrash about. And suddenly he was dropped hard back on the bed as if someone body slammed him on it.
Wow.
Jack jumped up off the bed to his feet shouting, "Show yourself!" But of course, all was silent. It was in that moment that Jack realized he was the most scared he had ever been in his life.
Yeah.
Whatever this thing was, it had the ability to toss him around like a toy, and that truly left him shaken.
Oof. I mean, a lot of really, really creepy things are happening here. And it's like, part of it, I'm sure, is like, it's easy to be like, oh, well, no one's been like harmed, like it's not that scary. But it's like, can you imagine that? Like, you're levitating 2 feet off of your bed. Like, that is so much space. You have no, like, it's just, this stuff is just horrifying.
It's true. But it was one evening in June of 1985 that things got seriously extreme.
Okay.
Jack and Janet were laying in bed. They had literally just finished making love.
Oh.
Janet was laying in Jack's arms when suddenly, in a split second, she felt something grip her leg and pull her from the bed.
Ooh.
Think of like Paranormal Activity, the first one where it's dragging, like literally like that.
Yeah.
Quickly, she grabbed onto Jack's hand and the bedding, and Jack is also horrified. He looks up to see his wife's leg up in the air like something's got a hold of it.
So freaky.
It's clearly like pulling her. It's not just her standing with her leg in the air pretending.
Right.
It was like tug of war. And of course, they're both completely naked, so there's the extra feeling of like vulnerability.
Yeah, it's just weird, yeah.
You're bare ass naked and something's like pulling you out of,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a double-edged, like there's terror and you're just exposed and like
violated and
yeah. Jack pulled as hard as he could, both of them screaming. And then suddenly, Jack felt the sensation of being paralyzed.
Oh no.
He seized up, unable to keep pulling. Janet screamed for Jack, hanging onto his frozen hand with the grip of some invisible hand on her leg. Her grip was starting to slip. Every inch of her was filled with blind terror. But just then, whatever it was, let go. But it wasn't over yet. Suddenly, there came a loud banging from within the walls. The room instantly filled with an overwhelming odor that made them both retch.
Ugh.
Jack grabbed hold of Janet and the two fled the room. After that event, Janet's demeanor changed considerably.
Yeah.
She became horribly depressed.
Yeah.
She felt like her family was trapped in their own home. She spent as much time as she could with the television, just trying to cheer herself up with shows like Gilligan's Island and Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah, just try to get her mind off it, I'm sure.
But none of it allowed her to shake that feeling she had. Every avenue that her and Jack had considered as a way to get help, they came up against frauds and crooks. Janet took a risk and wrote a letter to the local Channel 16 news, but got back no response. Janet fell even further into her depression, feeling all hope was lost and that her family was prey to whatever was in their home. Also remember, while they were away camping was when the neighbors had heard that blood-curdling scream.
That's right.
So now the whole neighborhood kind of knows their business, which makes the situation all that much worse.
Yeah.
Because, some people are, I'm sure there's all sorts of people are thinking, they want attention.
Right.
Or people think those people must be something wrong if there's something evil in their house.
Right.
There's all sorts of ways people are feeling about this. Mm-hmm. Now, here is the part I really hate.
Oh, fuck.
Really, really hate. The entity was not only cruel to people, but pets as well.
Oh, fuck.
The Smurl family had, for many years, a German shepherd named Simon, and he was the sweetest dog.
We love Simon here.
One night, Janet was in the kitchen doing dishes. Simon was laying sleeping by her feet, and she watched as some invisible force picked Simon up off the ground and slammed him hard against the refrigerator door.
Jesus.
Simon yelped in pain, and Janet dove on top of him and held him as he whimpered in her arms.
Oh.
Another time in the kitchen, Simon was walking in, and she saw his legs buckle, and he howled in pain.
Oh.
She had no idea what the entity was doing to him, so again, all she could do was just hold him until it stopped.
The baby. Yeah, fuck this entity.
Yeah. But here's what is also weird. Just a few days later, next door at Mary and John's place, they had a strange experience involving a canine as well.
Oh.
However, this was no living pup. On this evening, John was in the kitchen repairing an appliance and Mary was wrapped up in a TV show. That was when something in the corner of her eye got her attention. She turned to look and her jaw dropped. There was a puppy with no head and no tail. It just scampered across the living room and dashed under the love seat. And by no head and no tail, it didn't give the sense that it was like a gory thing, but but almost like it didn't fully form.
Yeah.
It still had the like happy demeanor of a puppy. It just had no head and no tail. It was like it didn't fully load or something. It's like in a video game, like something didn't load all the way.
Right.
They called over Jack to help find the thing, and here's something wild. Jack measured the love seat, and there was only an inch of space between the bottom of the love seat and the floor. So no obviously normal living puppy could have slid underneath that.
Right.
All of the children, too, were constantly frightened.
Oh, no.
A very common occurrence was the sound of flapping wings, as if from a giant bird.
Ooh, so creepy.
And of course the usual as well, such as objects moving around, the sound of scratching in the walls, etc. One night after Jack and Janet had tucked their daughter Shannon into bed, they waited to leave the room until she was sound asleep. Shannon slept in the top of a bunk bed, and not long later they were shocked when they heard a loud thud followed by Shannon crying somewhere in the dark house. They ran to her room thinking she had fallen out of her bunk, but she wasn't in her room. No, they found her down at the bottom of the stairs, up against the wall, sobbing. Her parents would have heard her if she had gotten up out of the bed to go downstairs.
Right.
Both of them comforted her and asked her what had happened, but she had no idea how she got there.
Oh, fuck.
Thank God, though, there seemed to be no serious injuries from it. But
could have been much worse.
Yes, but enough was enough. Jack and Janet were going to find help.
Hell yeah.
Daily now, the family was being terrorized by various things. Items being thrown at them, the sound of snakes hissing.
Oof.
The incessant banging and scratching in the walls. While Jack began to search for help, Janet knew if she was going to beat this thing, she had to better understand it. So every day, regardless of the weather, Janet was at the library, reading everything she could get her hands on that pertained to what might be afflicting them.
Okay.
She read books of all sorts, and if it did one thing, it at least gave the family a bit of peace knowing that others had had similar experiences.
Totally.
But during this time, a new kind of manifestation was making its presence known to Jack and Janet.
Oh, God.
One night, Janet woke up to see that the room was filled with a sort of mist. It was coming through the open window, which was not open when they went to sleep, mind you.
Oh, really?
And it sort of spread over the bed, almost like a spider web.
Oh.
It was this mist that almost had the consistency of a spider's web.
No.
She tried to wake Jack, but couldn't. She would learn later that Jack was probably under the influence of some sort of psychic sleep.
Oh.
That these entities can put people under.
Interesting. Okay.
The idea being that if an entity wants to do something for only one person, it can sort of put them into a trance-like state so they are not part of it. So they don't witness what happens.
I see. Okay.
But a few nights later, it happened again, and this time Jack did wake up. Both Janet and Jack watched this thick mist, like I said, almost the consistency of a spider web, come through the window, and they watched it begin to clump up together and form the shape of a person. They watched in terror as the mist person stood silently.
Oh my God.
Then it suddenly dashed into their closet and was gone.
Oh my gosh.
Now, the first person to come to the aid of the Smurl family was a priest named Sean Malone.
Okay.
Father Sean was a longtime friend of the family and believed them when they told him of their plight.
Yeah, a homie.
So they invited him over for dinner one night to bless the home. And after dinner, Father Malone went upstairs and immediately told them there was a demonic presence in the house.
Yeah.
While Father Malone showed no outward sign of distress, Jack and Janet couldn't help but notice the sweat begin to trickle down his face.
Yikes.
Whatever this thing was, it wanted Father Malone out of there.
Yeah.
But regardless, he went about the house, blessing each room as he went. At one point, they were afraid Father Malone was going to faint, but he proceeded with the blessing. And for the next 3 days, no activity whatsoever.
Just long enough to make you think maybe
Yep.
this will last.
But of course, it would pick back up.
Oh, yeah.
One night, Mary Smurl awoke from a nap to find that both her and the mattress she was on, so this is Mary Smurl, Jack's mother.
Right.
She awoke to find that both her and the mattress she was on levitating all the way up close to the ceiling.
Oh my God.
Terrified,
What?
Mary did the only thing she could think to do and just threw herself from the mattress, badly bruising her knees when she hit the ground.
Oh God.
John Smurl was out playing cards that evening when the incident happened, and this pushed the family to reach out once again for help. This time, they brought in the Monsignor.
Monsignor.
Once again, the house was blessed, and for many days it seemed like it worked.
Okay.
But as always, it would eventually return.
Oh God.
But other folks from non-religious backgrounds reached out as well, including academics who studied paranormal phenomena. And they found their advice very helpful as well, such as keeping a diary to remember every little thing that happened.
Okay.
And they were also told to try and remain as calm as possible during crazy moments. The reason being that these things would feed off their energy.
Totally. I was thinking the same thing.
But the Smurls were about to get a life-changing phone call.
Okay.
It was now January of 1986, and Janet was taking a break from housework with a cup of coffee and a cigarette in the kitchen, and that's when the phone rang. It was Janet's longtime friend, Tricia Larson, who lived outside of town. During this whole ordeal, Janet had kept Tricia updated on all that was going on.
Right.
Tricia herself had an interest in the paranormal and was always willing to be a shoulder to cry on and, an ear to listen for Janet.
Nice.
Especially when times got hard.
A homie.
She told her she had some great news. The night before, Tricia had read an article about a professor at Marywood College in Scranton who was apparently an expert in the field. Being that the man was a professor at a respected college, the Smurls were not so concerned that this man may be a kook or a crank of some kind, or a fraud,
Right.
So Janet got in touch with the professor, and he was very kind and believed her when she told him what they were experiencing. Once again, it's kind of nice that everyone, in fact, the only pushback they get is from the Catholic Church themselves.
Classic.
And from what he was told, he could tell it was a very serious situation. Janet was relieved when he told her he knew of some people who could help. They were a married couple with years of experience in the field, and their names were Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Fuck yeah.
So the Smurls got in touch with the Warrens, and to them it sounded like a genuine case of demonic activity. They made their way to the Smurls' duplex, and they waited outside for a bit, observing the place before going in. This was simply to kind of get a sense of the aura about the place,
Mm-hmm.
Ed and Lorraine had with them a friend and associate named Diane, who was a psychic. Also with them was Robert Curran, the co-author of the book that we used as a source.
Oh, lovely.
I should also say Robert Curran wrote it, but also Ed and Lorraine helped write it. There's parts where they write it in their own words.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so Robert Curran, the author of the source, is there with them.
Lovely.
Lorraine herself is a trance medium, and Ed asked both Lorraine and Diane if they were picking up on anything, and neither did. But this was most likely because what was in the Smurls' house knew they were there and was laying in wait. So the Warrens and company, they went inside and met the Smurls, and they sat for a long time in the kitchen just having coffee and listening to everything the Smurls had experienced. The Warrens, too, explained their history and the methods of dealing with such issues. But during this conversation, they weren't really sensing anything of note. Oh, but that was soon about to change.
Yeah.
While Robert was finishing up the interview with the Smurls, Lorraine and Diane were going to take a tour of the house. Diane and Lorraine were about halfway up the staircase when they felt it. Both of them stopped in their tracks. Diane turned to Lorraine and whispered, asking if Lorraine was feeling the same thing she was feeling, and she was. The unmistakable feeling of evil lurking nearby. They heard a noise. It wasn't really a loud noise, but it was distinct. They walked up the rest of the stairs and down the hall to the last door at the end of the hall there. The door was closed and no one was inside of it, but it was the room where the noise had come from. Taking a deep breath, both women entered the room. It was empty, but in the air was the sweet smell of Janet's perfume and cosmetics. They looked around and eventually their attention turned to the closet. Lorraine could sense there was something in the closet. So they quickly opened the closet door and shined their flashlights inside. And that was when they noticed the smell. It was a demonic smell. And here was something interesting. Lorraine asked Diane if she could smell it, and Diane said yes, it was the stench of demons. And Lorraine specified, saying, the fourth one. So collecting themselves, both women said a prayer and headed downstairs to tell the Smurls the news. Sitting at the table in the kitchen, they told the Smurls the specifics of what was haunting them. And Lorraine explained that there were 4 spirits haunting the duplex.
Gotcha.
The first was an elderly woman who was most likely senile but not violent. Next was the spirit of a young woman who was apparently insane and was very violent.
Ooh.
However, Lorraine was confident that she could be removed with prayer. The third one they knew less about, except that it was a man with a mustache who had the ability to cause severe harm if he wanted to.
Oh.
But before she told them about the fourth, Lorraine asked that the family remain calm.
Oh, no.
Because the fourth entity haunting their house was not a human spirit, but a demonic one.
Yeah.
She explained that this demon's goal was to destroy the family in whatever way it could, and that it could also manipulate the other 3 spirits in the house to do its will. It could appear in many different forms as well. Ed Warren then explained how this demonic entity had most likely been in the place long before the Smurls had even gotten there. And if there was one thing we know here on Creep Street, it's that sometimes when a house has 1 or more people in it that are around the age of puberty,
Oh, yeah.
it can kickstart the paranormal stuff.
Yeah. Especially, poltergeist specifically, but really anything.
Well, the Smurls had 4 daughters,
Oh,
right about that age.
yeah.
And as Ed described it, the family was essentially a battery, giving this entity the energy it needed to do what it does.
Interesting. Okay.
Ed also explained that the demon will appear randomly at different times to different people in the house in different ways.
Yeah.
This is a way of stoking confusion and fear. If it were to appear before all of them all at once, while yes, it would still be scary, there would be more of a sense of solidarity in being there together.
Right. And knowing this is the ghost or whatever, or demon or whatever. This is what they look like. This is what they do, blah, blah, blah. Then it's but each interaction is different, so you don't know how many you're dealing with. It's scary. Yeah.
Right. Because if the entity appears to one person, the others may doubt if the person really saw what they said they saw.
Right.
Thus sowing division. The Smurls had mentioned earlier how they couldn't sleep. They always felt tired and cold, and Ed explained that was because the thing was zapping their energy.
Yeah, yeah.
Next, Ed went and paid a visit to John and Mary Smurl next door. And John admitted that at first he was skeptical of what people said was going on, but he soon learned the truth and that it was all too real. That same evening around 6:30 p.m., everyone had dinner, and Ed and Lorraine explained how their process was to begin. After they had finished dinner, they wanted everyone to go upstairs to the bedroom. There, they would attempt to get the demon to expose itself in some way. So after dinner, everyone goes up to the bedroom. Jack, Janet, and Lorraine sat on the bed, while Diane stood in front of the dresser operating a 35mm camera on a tripod. Ed stood in the corner by the window and said it was now time to pray. Together, the group said 3 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys. Ed had a tape recorder with him and popped on a recording of a nun singing Ave Maria. For the first time in a long time, the room felt peaceful, like it had when the family first moved in.
Interesting.
When the song had completed, they turned on the lights and asked Lorraine what she was sensing. She merely said,
"A very bright light on the front of the closet and a dimmer one by the bedroom door."
but they needed more. So they turned the lights back off and played Ave Maria again. They were starting to pray when there suddenly came a loud, tearing sound. Everyone looked up at the 2 large mirrors attached to the dresser. One was shaking, and they could even see the screws on it moving back and forth like someone was trying to tear this thing off the mountings.
Wow.
There was also a portable black and white TV that sat on Jack and Janet's dresser. The TV had long been unplugged, yet now they were shocked to see an eerie white and silver glow coming from it.
Oh, wow.
Diane jumped away from the dresser, which was now shaking and rattling violently. It seemed as though the mirror was about to rip off of its mounts and fly across the room. Ed quickly grabbed his holy water and, making the sign of the cross, began to sprinkle the holy water around the room, praying and demanding that whatever was there be gone in the name of Jesus Christ. As he did, the dresser slowly stopped its rattling until it came to a complete stop. The glowing TV dimmed until it went back to normal. Jack and Janet breathed a sigh of relief that they had found the Warrens. And while Jack and Janet were hoping that their problems were now over, Ed told them that this night was only the beginning. Things seemed to be at peace for the moment, so they all returned back downstairs to the kitchen table. Ed explained that in their work they had found that often there's specific places in the house where the activity seems to be centered. Hot spots is what he called them. It seemed that Jack and Janet's room was the hot spot in this instance, and that the closet in their room was where the entity would pass back and forth from Jack and Janet's side of the duplex to John and Mary's side.
Wow, okay.
Jack and Janet, despite being religiously devout, didn't even know where to begin when it came to this sort of stuff.
This is not like a common thing that happens in the Catholic Church at the time or now or before, where it's not like it's just all Catholics just know what to do when something like this happens, you know? So it makes sense.
Ed gave them a piece of paper with a prayer written on it. It read,
"In the name of Jesus Christ, in the blood of Christ, I command you to leave and return from where you came."
Ed told them to use this in moments of danger, and to use holy water and make the sign of the cross if possible. They were advised that the first thing the next morning they should go to a diocesan shop and buy religious candles and incense and get a ton of holy water.
Oh, yeah.
They also recommended reaching out to a priest that was willing to perform the rite of exorcism.
Okay.
Janet was worried that they would be rejected for asking such a thing, but Ed told them they must convince them if necessary. And to remember, at the end of the day, there is no guarantee that they would be able to cleanse their house of this entity. But the Warrens assured them they would do anything they could to help, and much to Jack and Janet's surprise, informed them that their services were 100% free.
Wow.
The Warrens bid the family farewell and left for the night. But now that the Warrens were gone, the night was about to get a whole lot crazier. The family all joined hands and prayed for 20 minutes straight and then readied themselves for bed.
Okay.
Janet had initially brought up the idea of the whole family sleeping in the living room, but Jack said no. They needed to be brave and not give in to the fear that fed it.
Okay, I see that. I was about to be pissed, but I see that.
They needed to sleep in their usual rooms like it was just a regular night. But I also wrote a note here. I said I would have demanded we all sleep in the same room.
Yeah.
Especially with children involved.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Come on.
That's how I feel too. But I see what he's saying though, because it's not just out of a like principle thing. It's not like we're not gonna let this ghost or whatever these beings make us scared. Blah blah. It's like they feed off of you kind of reacting to them
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it is. He's like, let's not give them anything to react to. And that's also kind of like going back to Appalachia. It's come up so much in the past few months, but it's
Right.
like when we said in our episode, the high strangeness in Appalachia, that people will, say, if you think you saw something, no, you didn't. And if you think you heard something, no, you didn't. Because sometimes just acknowledging these things and giving them our attention can make it a little wild.
Yeah. Especially, how do you expect a child, hey, when the scary shit starts, be tough. Like that, you can't, you know what I mean?
You can't. Unfortunately, it just doesn't really work that way.
That night, the twins, Shannon and Karen, laid awake in their room, too scared to fall asleep, of course. It was sometime during the night that the knock came.
Oh, fuck.
A loud, deep bang from within the walls. Shannon and Karen shot up straight in their beds. It was so loud that it woke everyone in the house up.
Wow.
Jack and Janet called out from their room saying, "What was that?" They had barely asked the question when there came the sound of a loud smack.
Oh, no.
Janet screamed and cried out,
"It just hit me!"
Moments later, another loud smack. Janet screamed as some invisible force just kept slapping her.
Oh, God.
Over and over, just slapping the hell out of her.
Oh, God.
Jack rolled over on top of Janet and held her close, trying to block whatever was hitting her, but then Jack felt a sensation on the bottom of his feet. It was a tickling sensation.
Oh, fuck.
But not one to make you giggle, one that would drive you crazy.
Oh, okay.
It was overpowering.
Oh, I hate this feeling.
Jack is suddenly up on the bed, jumping, kicking his feet, shouting like a wild animal. Meanwhile, Janet is still getting slapped over and over, and she's freaking out because her husband seems to be going wild.
Right.
Then the knocking came again, loud and booming, seeming to shake the whole house. Suddenly, again, that unplugged TV that sat on their dresser turned on, glowing bright, so bright that Jack and Janet had to shield their eyes. In the hallway, the family dog Simon stood guard in front of the girls' room.
Yes, we love Simon.
Eventually, around 3 a.m., the pounding stopped, and Jack and Janet were able to get their wits about them. That night, Jack would get up periodically to check in on the children, and Simon the dog would join him right by his side. The next morning, they received a call from Ed Warren checking in.
Oh.
And they explained the awful night they had just went through. The family went that morning and got the religious artifacts they were told to get. Lorraine called a local priest asking if he could perform the rite of exorcism, but she was rudely refused.
Oh, God.
At the very least, Ed and Lorraine suggested they go get the artifacts blessed by the priest.
Great.
So they took the items, and they took them, in fact, to that same priest who was rude to Lorraine on the phone. He begrudgingly blessed the items and then quickly left.
It's like, sir, that's your literal occupation.
He didn't even use holy water. This would be the beginning of a lot of pushback the Smurl family would receive from the Catholic Church
So frustrating.
throughout this whole story.
So frustrating.
Now that the entity had been formally called out, things were only getting worse at the Smurl family house.
Oh, no.
One day when Dawn came home from school, she found that her makeup was missing from her dresser. Now, the family at this point had long been acquainted with things in the house going missing since the haunting began. So frustrated, Dawn shouted out,
"I know why you took my makeup. It's because you're ugly and your mommy dresses you funny."
Janet was actually walking by her daughter's room as she was saying this, and it caused her to burst out laughing. But right as she did, that hammering sound began again in the walls. Bang, bang, bang.
Oh, no.
Janet quickly ran and got a tape recorder and ran back to Dawn's room, and she knelt down to where it seemed the knocking was emanating from. And she called out, saying that she wanted to communicate. Now, Dawn whispered to her mother harshly, because she knew that that was probably not a good idea, not to try and communicate with it directly.
Yeah.
But Janet was determined and told the entity to knock once for yes and 2 for no. She asked if it understood, and it made no knock. Once again, she asked if it understood, no knock.
Okay.
Not giving up, Janet asked if the entity was there to harm them, to which it responded with a resounding single knock. Meaning yes.
Oh, my God.
Now they were really freaked. Janet asked if it was going to hurt her specifically, and she got another single knock.
Oh, my God.
So Janet went heavy duty.
Yeah.
She then asked the entity if it believed in Jesus Christ. Immediately, there came a flurry of rapid, heavy knocks that seemed to shake the whole house.
Interesting.
And it was about 3 or 4 minutes until it finally stopped. That same day, after finishing up work around the house, Janet decided to take a nice, relaxing bath. She was enjoying her bath when suddenly she had the unmistakable feeling that eyes were on her.
Oh, God.
She tried to ignore it the best she could and just continue her bath, but that was when a whistle came.
Fuck.
A cat call sort of whistle. Janet screamed, and Jack, who was downstairs reading the paper, came running to her aid. You see, hanging on the wall across from the bathroom was a crucifix hanging on the wall there, so Jack opened the bathroom door wide so Janet could see it. And once she did, the whistling subsided. Jack stayed in the bathroom by her side while she finished her bath. It was getting to the point now where none of the family could ever get a simple moment's rest.
Yeah, they just can't do anything.
A few days later, it was late on a Friday night and the whole family was asleep. It was around 2 a.m. and Jack was awakened by the sound of people whispering, like they were having a hushed conversation.
Okay, and we've heard this many times as well.
He thought at first maybe it was the twins, but certainly not at 2 a.m. And that's when something caught Jack's eye. In their room, standing in a shadowy corner, he saw the figures of 2 women. Immediately, he tensed up with fear. One woman appeared to be in her 20s, the other woman in her early 40s.
Okay.
Both of them were dressed in old-fashioned bonnets and dresses. Certainly not of the current time. Stranger still was that a strange glow seemed to emanate from the women. And then, suddenly, they were gone. The next morning, Jack told Janet, and while they certainly could not deny that it may have been supernatural, they tried to take comfort thinking maybe it was just a vivid dream brought on by the stress. But this was no dream. The very next night, it happened again. Jack was awakened by the hushed conversation of the 2 women speaking in the corner. Jack tried to wake Janet, but couldn't. Once again, this was perhaps another instance of the psychic sleep. He watched as the women appeared from the dark of the closet. They whispered, and to Jack's horror, the younger woman then turned her head and looked directly at him, smiling an unnatural, evil smile. Jack tried to scream but realized he couldn't. In fact, he seemed to once again be paralyzed. The 2 women whispered as if they were talking shit about him, until finally they glided back into the closet and disappeared. The image of those 2 women would be something that truly rattled Jack. Even the thought of them would make him shudder.
The unnatural, huge smile thing is so scary to me. It's so unsettling.
Well, during all of this, the Warrens were in near daily contact with the family, and it was February when the Warrens dispatched a team of psychic researchers to the duplex to do some more in-depth investigating. This team consisted of a few men, one named Jason Kearns and Rick Monroe. Jason worked as a legal secretary in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he accompanied the Warrens many times in their investigations. Ricky was from the town of Huntington, and he was also a frequent collaborator with the Warrens. Immediately as they pulled up to the duplex, they could feel something evil inside.
Oh boy.
After meeting with Jack and Janet, Ricky and Jason began to set up tape recorders and other equipment in the upstairs hallway and around the various spots where they believed the entities were able to pass through from one side of the duplex to the other.
Okay.
Jason was very upfront with Jack and Janet that if he was going to do his job well, that he needed to start from a place of essentially not believing their claims. Even though they had been told by the Warrens themselves, it was crucial that he at least start with a skeptical mind. So the Smurls relayed to him everything that had happened, and while Jason was interviewing the Smurls, Ricky heard the first knock. For about an hour straight, everyone listened as heavy knocking from within the walls moved from room to room, and then there were the odors popping up all over the house as well. The team stayed up all night, making a new entry into their record logs every 5 minutes. Ricky would return to the Smurls not long after that, bringing with him this time a man named Brad Peterson, who was also an affiliate of the Warrens and who worked professionally as a paramedic. Brad interviewed Jack and Janet as well, asking them about their religious affiliations and if any of them had done something that may have welcomed this entity into their home. Brad would also experience the knocking sounds as well. Now that they had collected a lot more info, Ed and Lorraine Warren decided they were going to personally help, and they would bring a team.
Nice.
Part of this team was Jeff Newton, a police officer in Hartford, Connecticut, a 19-year veteran of the police force there. Brady Cotter, a statistician from a large marketing company. And Chris McKinnell, who was actually the Warrens' grandson.
Oh.
Who had a BA in psychology.
Oh, that's cool.
He would also make some very interesting discoveries in the case. He noticed that the knocking in the wall sometimes almost took on a clippity-clop rhythm, almost like that of hooves.
Right.
And when listening back to a recording of the knocking, it sounded like there was the sound of many pigs squealing as well.
Oh my God, what the fuck?
It was now March, and this would mark the beginning of a 4-year saga in the battle with this demonic entity.
Oh my God.
One that the Warrens were uncertain could be won. When the Warrens arrived, Lorraine had an experience in Jack and Janet's room upstairs. She was searching the room when a scratching noise from the window caught her attention. She looked up and saw it. A hideous, shadowy creature. Collecting herself, she went downstairs and told the Smurls what she had just seen. She explained that this entity always walked hunched over. It never stood up straight. It could appear out of nowhere and at any time, and it could walk through walls with ease. It could also cause a living person to see whatever it wanted them to see. It could put visions into their mind that seemed as real as the world around them.
Wow.
It could also cause the other ghosts in the place to become malevolent and act out its will. Even simple things like items going missing in the house was just another tactic that it used to confuse them. But if there was any good news, the Warrens did find a priest who would agree to come to the duplex.
Hell yeah.
The priest arrived at 6 p.m. that evening. He was very polite and friendly, but it was obvious that he was also a bit nervous. He went about the house, blessing each room as he went. Once finished, he said his farewells and left. While the family was happy the place had been blessed, they couldn't help but notice that the priest seemed to have heard about the family's predicament already. They did not like the idea that people were gossiping about them, and they had no idea to what extent or what was being said. But their work for the evening was not over. They all went out for dinner at a local restaurant and then returned to perform a dangerous rite meant to provoke the entity. When they returned home, Ed made his way upstairs to Jack and Janet's bedroom. The point of the ritual was to use the name of Jesus Christ to get the entity to appear and then banish it from the place. The moment that Ed entered the bedroom, he was hit by a drastic chill. He walked around the room before pausing in front of the closet. That was when Ed was overcome by some sort of energy. He began to pray, and as he did, he felt hands grip around his throat and a force push him backwards. Ed clawed wildly at the air. He fell backwards onto the bed, unable to breathe. In that moment, he prayed in his mind and imagined his body surrounded and glowing with the healing white light of Jesus Christ and the love of God. As he did, the grip around his throat began to ease up. Jeff Newton, an assistant of the Warrens, thought he heard a scuffle going on upstairs, so he ran to investigate, and he saw what was happening, and he knelt by Ed's side and prayed until the entity had left. But Ed was not done yet. His intention was to perform this rite in every room of the house.
Oh, wow.
After catching his breath for a moment in the hallway, he headed into the adjacent bedroom and began. In like a matter of moments, the temperature in the room seemed to have dropped at least 30 degrees. As Ed kept on praying and demanding that the demon leave the house, he noticed above the bureau this thin, shimmering thread appear that almost seemed to be like that of a spider web.
Yeah.
And it glowed. He watched in shock as it began to spell something out.
Oh my God.
Until finally it spelled out the message,
"You filthy bastard. Get out of this house."
Oh my God.
It was then that a horrible smell filled the room and the temperature dropped even further, and Ed could feel a paralysis take over his body.
Oh no.
But using what strength he could muster, he raised the crucifix in his hand towards the mirror and rebuked the demon in the name of Jesus Christ. The more he did this, he felt the paralysis leave his body. And as he did, the glowing words above the bureau began to fade until they were gone as well, and the smell left the room, and the temperature warmed back up. For a moment, there seemed to be peace.
Thank God. That is, talk about going through the ringer. That is some scary shit.
Yeah, it absolutely.
Wow. And it's like, see, it's really the paralysis thing for me that, like, we're not being able to scream when you feel like you need to scream. Both of those things have come up here, and those both are, like, such big, just, like, visceral issues for me that, like, are just scary. Oh.
Yeah. Ed and Jeff went back downstairs to join the others, only to realize they had experiences of their own. One of the team members, Brady Cotter, had the sensation on his shoulders of being jerked one way and then the other. He also had the feeling that there was electricity filling the air. The hair on his arms stood up on end. It was clear that the entities were drawing energy from him.
Yeah.
Lorraine prayed for Brady, and soon the sensation went away. But just then, Jack let out a quick yelp of pain. Everyone looked over and saw a nasty bite mark on his ear. Interesting thing was, a few days earlier, Jack had noticed what seemed to be bite marks elsewhere on his body, but he assumed maybe it was just a wasp sting. But then he thought about it and realized February in Pennsylvania isn't exactly the time for wasps.
Nah.
But it wasn't so much the bites themselves that were the giveaway as it was the number of bites. On Jack's body, there were 3 bite marks, and we know what that means.
Oh, yes. 3.
It's supposed to mock the Trinity, is what it's believed to be the intent.
Wow, okay.
Fortunately, the bites would fade away in the coming days, but things certainly had not gotten easier. Their dog Simon had once again been levitated off the ground and seemed so scared and on edge they were worried the poor pup would go insane.
Oh.
In fact, on one occasion, the family watched in horror as Simon entirely vanished before their eyes, as if he had dematerialized.
Oh my God.
And as he appeared back into reality, he howled a terrified howl. Mary Smurl once again saw the dark cloaked figure standing in the doorway of her bedroom. Things were only ramping up. Now, folks, buckle up. This, just a little bit of warning. We are about to talk about a very extreme case of sexual violence that happened to Jack. This is an interview directly from the Warrens' files. This was on a tape recorder. Maureen and I are going to read this conversation verbatim.
Jack, would you describe what happened on the night of June 21st?
The surprising thing was that the house had been pretty peaceful for 2 or 3 days. We watched a movie on TV, got the girls to bed, had some lemonade, and then went upstairs to go to bed.
How did you first know something was wrong?
The way I came awake, I guess.
There was something different about it?
Yeah, it was like I'd been, thrown off a cliff or something. You know, as if some violent action woke me up.
Can you describe what you saw?
At first, I didn't see anything at all. I just felt this tremendous sort of panic. I wasn't sure if I was having a nightmare or not.
What convinced you that you weren't having a nightmare?
Her scales.
Her scales? You mean those serpentine snake-like scales?
Yes.
You said she. These scales were on a woman.
Yes.
Would you describe her?
To be honest, I even hate to think about her. Her skin was paper white, but it was covered in some places with the scaly surface I mentioned, and then in other places with open sores, the kind you'd think a leper would have or something, and these sores were running with pus.
How old was she?
I would estimate around 65 or 70, I can't be sure.
What else do you first notice about her?
She had long, white, scraggly hair, and her eyes were all red, and the inside of her mouth and her gums were green. Some of her teeth were missing, but those she had were very long and vampire-like.
What about her body?
That was the weird thing. Her body itself was firm, you know, like that of a younger woman.
What did she do?
She paralyzed me in some way. I saw her walking out of the shadows to our bed, and I sensed what she was going to do, but I couldn't stop her.
Then what?
Then she mounted me in the dominant position and started riding me. That's the only way I can describe it.
Was it pleasurable?
No. In fact, I don't remember feeling anything at all other than panic and complete terror.
What was Janet doing during all this?
Only after I'd been awake for a time did I realize that Janet had earlier gone downstairs to sleep on the couch, which she occasionally does in the hot months.
What about the succubus? What was it doing?
Coming to a sexual climax. She just looked at me and smiled, showing those incredible teeth. I tried to look away, but something held my eyes to her. I could tell when she was having orgasms because she would give little jerks and her smile would broaden.
She was having orgasms?
Oh, yes. You could tell that by her expressions and her movements.
Then what happened?
Then she vanished.
Just like that?
Just like that. Just vanished. And that's when I noticed the sticky substance all over me.
Sticky substance?
Yes. I suppose you'd have to compare it to semen, the texture of it anyway. It was emitted from the creature's vagina, and I was sore, too.
Sore?
Yes, as if I'd had prolonged sex, even though it had been only a few minutes. But then I began to wonder if I hadn't passed out during it or something because, as I said, my genitals were extremely sore.
Did you have any idea what had happened?
I called Ed Warren in the morning and he told me all about succubi and that they don't have any gender, but that a devil that rapes a man is known as a succubus, and one that rapes a woman is known as an incubus.
What happened next?
I went into the bedroom and looked myself over. The fluid on my body had a very pungent odor. I took a shower and washed it off as quickly as I could. I had to scrub very hard. Then I went downstairs to tell Janet what had happened.
What was her reaction?
She started crying and said that no matter what, she was going to see that the church got involved in our problem and help resolve it. She said that the very first thing she was going to do in the morning was call the diocese office. Then something even odder happened.
What was that?
The next morning at breakfast, my daughter Dawn talked about a dream she had had about me being attacked by this horrible, ugly woman. She saw this hag with teeth missing and sores all over her body having sex with me. The thing was, I hadn't told the kids about the attack. Dawn couldn't possibly have known about my rape except through her nightmare. Both Janet and I were really startled and upset by this. It seemed to make Janet calling the diocese office all the more important.
So she called.
Yes, the next day.
Did they cooperate?
No. It turned out to be almost as terrifying as the succubus itself.
Now,
Wow.
yes. And there is also mentioned briefly, Janet apparently at some time during all this was also sexually assaulted. She didn't get R-worded, but was sexually assaulted. So now we have reached like a level of just unimaginable terror.
I mean, that what we just read there was so frightening and disturbing. It reminds me like a little bit of The Shining with the bathroom situation. Yeah, that is very, very upsetting. And I can only imagine how traumatic and truly terrifying that must have been.
Well, Janet was now determined that no matter what, they were going to get help from the Catholic Church, even if she had to drag someone there. So the next morning, she called the diocese office and the receptionist put her in touch with a Father Calloway. Janet wasted no time saying what her family had been dealing with and how severe and dangerous it was, and much to her relief, Father Calloway believed her. So Janet told him everything from how it all started with just knocks to what had finally happened to Jack the night prior. She also expressed to him that they had so far had no luck getting anyone from the church to help them out. Father Calloway said he would speak to the chancellor and get them help, to which Janet was overjoyed. He told Janet to let him speak to the chancellor and to call him back in the morning. When Jack got home from work, she was over the moon and told him the news. Jack was also excited. So excited, he hopped on the phone with a friend of his who had been in the loop about what was going on at their house. Jack's friend had also been very skeptical that they would get the Catholic Church to help them out. And Jack said that Janet had finally spoken to a Father Calloway at the diocese and that he was going to help them out. But here's the thing. Jack's friend was well acquainted with the diocese and knew almost everyone there. He had never heard of a Father Calloway.
Oh no, why is this happening?
Jack's friend even put in a call to the diocese himself and called the Smurls back 20 minutes later to say the diocese reported no Father Calloway that served there.
Oh my God, so who were they talking to?
However, Jack's friend was a personal acquaintance of one Father Emmett Doyle, who was the chancellor of the Diocese of Scranton.
A lot of Irish people here.
And he gave the Smurls his contact info. The next day, Janet would call the diocese again, and this time would speak to Chancellor Father Emmett Doyle. She talked to Father Doyle about both the mysterious Father Calloway and the haunting the family had been enduring. And to her dread, Father Doyle was not familiar with a Father Calloway. Janet wondered to herself if somehow the evil entity in her home was further playing tricks on her mind by pretending to be a priest that really didn't exist. Regardless, Father Doyle heard out what Janet had to say, and after quietly listening to her story, he asked that she give him the evening to consider everything he had been told and that he would call her back tomorrow. That night was very quiet in the Smurl home, and they were able to get a rare reprieve from the usual chaos. The next day, though, Janet would wait by the phone the whole day and never get a call back from Father Doyle. For the rest of this story, the church would never officially get involved in their case. Their hope was now riding fully on the Warrens.
Yeah.
And it was almost time for the first exorcism of this story. And that is where we will end Volume 1 of the Smurl Family Haunting.
Oh my gosh, Dylan, what a great way to end this episode, leaving us on a cliffhanger. I see what you're doing. But for real, though, that was such a great episode. Very well researched and put together. Thank you so much, Dylan, for doing all of that. And yeah, the ending there, where the reveal that there was no Dr. Calloway, was that what it was? Or
yeah.
There was no Dr. Calloway? That's fucking weird. So did Janet actually speak to someone from the Archdiocese, and then, like, the Archdiocese were then manipulated by this entity to tell her someone that doesn't actually exist, while they, like, thought, in their heads at the moment this person existed? Or, like, did she never even call the Archdiocese in the first place? And it just, like, it made the entities or whatever made her think and feel like she had that conversation?
Yeah.
Like, that's so weird.
So weird.
When you get to the point where you are not, of course, there's so much about these kinds of stories and experiences that are horrifying. But what really gets me is, like, when your reality isn't making sense anymore.
Right, exactly.
It's like, of course, it's so scary to, see a ghost or, all of these things. But then you realize that something that happened either didn't happen or was fabricated or whatever. It's like, that's fucking weird.
Very weird.
So, Dylan, thank you for putting that banger together, and I am very, very excited for Volume 2.
Well, Maureen, I got a list of names I wouldn't mind moving into a duplex with.
Okay.
Folks, give it on up for our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, and the hellacious Cale Hoffman.
I am obsessed with those names right there. I mean,
oh yeah,
incredible, gorgeous. We love it. All of you, our top tier Patreon subscribers, gosh darn it, do we love you so much. To all of our Patreon subscribers, we love you too. You're so great. And to all of you listening out there, whether you're a Patreon member or not, we love you. Thank you for listening, and please leave a rating, a like, a subscribe, share us on social media, tell your cousin about us, tell your chauffeur about us if you have one. All of these sorts of things. Spread the good word. We so appreciate it. And we're excited for all these fun things coming up, switching to Mondays, getting merch going, all this stuff. We're having a good time.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night. And goodbye.
Bye-bye.